We have an incredible keynote this afternoon to close out TLC 2018. I had the privilege of meeting our keynote speaker almost 10 years ago to the day, and at Clinton, Iowa, at Ashford's campus. Andrew McCann originally came into our lives at Ashford and Bridgepoint when we began integrating Waypoint outcomes into our courses in 2008. From the time I met Andrew, his passion for student learning and his innovative and entrepreneurial spirit was evident. Andrew is the creator of Waypoint Outcomes. He taught first-year writing and engineering at Drexel and started Waypoint in 2006. He joined Bridgepoint in 2009 when we acquired Waypoint, and with Bridgepoint resources turned a simple web app into SpeedGrader before there was a SpeedGrader, and with data. He has a new startup focused on feedback and student engagement and is really happy to be working with one of the largest education innovative incubators in the world again. Please help me give a warm welcome to Andrew McCann.
Am I live? Yes. Thank you, Morgan, for that and for the introduction. That lab is you guys, right? Is Ashford, is where I'm so excited to be back working with you. The other thing I thought maybe you would mention is Morgan, when she asked me to do this, she said, you have such a passion for feedback. And I took that a little bit like, and this is a weird reference, so only a third of you, if that, will get it. It's one of the hazards of being a teacher and getting older. All your references go away. If you can remember the classic 1986 film, Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield, and he's in a classroom with Sam Kinison as the teacher, and Rodney Dangerfield's a student, and he says about Sam Kinison, boy, he really seems to care about his students. He's a little like loony and over. So that was how I took a little bit of the passion about feedback, like, whoa, dude. And that's what I'm here today to talk about, is feedback is something I've been obsessed with, and this opportunity to come and speak was really a lovely opportunity to think back and reflect. So, and last year, Jared Stein gave me a real gift. He was here as one of your keynotes last year, the VP product of Instructure, Canvas, the product. And he talked about student engagement and a lot of the research that's out there, and also tied it into Canvas and their work. One of the things that popped out to me, because it's one of those kind of moments in your life that really stand out, was he quoted the Gallup Purdue study, which is done every year, but it was done for the first time in 2014. Surveyed 30,000 students, and Gallup cares about engagement. I mean, in a way, their outcomes are even more important than the outcomes that we think about as educators. You know, did they learn how to think critically and use resources and research? Those are important tactical outcomes, but really it's about having a happy, fulfilling life, right? And finding work that's meaningful to you and being engaged in it. And that's what Gallup cares about. And so they've done this study of college students, and emotional support is one of the key things that students can get through their college education that correlates to success beyond college. And, and the sad data point, and he shared this exact number, one of the key things around emotional support is that my instructor, professor cared about me. And only 27% of students surveyed, 30,000 students, agreed with that statement. And the reason this resonates for me is I saw Brandon Bastide, who at the time, until recently, was the Gallup guy in charge of this survey. I saw him present at South by EDU. And he rattled out this statistic, and I almost tackled him after the presentation, because I wanted to know, how the hell do you measure that your professor cared about you? Like, what does that even mean? And he chuckled, and he's a brilliant guy. I think he's now kind of a competitor to Ashford, because he's running Kaplan Higher Ed now as the president of Kaplan Higher Ed. Really deep thinker about education, really, really bright. And he kind of chuckled, at least that's how I took it. And the answer is so underwhelming that to me it sets the stage for a lot of the conversation today. His answer to my question, what do you even mean by a professor cared about me? His answer was, did they know my name? That's the bar for does a professor in the big, huge higher education industry that we're a part of, do they care about me? Did they know my name? Not did they invite me over to their house for dinner? Did they know my kids' names? Did anything like that? No. Just do they know my name? So to me, that's, the bar is below the floor when it comes to engage. If only 27% of students agree with that, my goodness, right? Where are we with fulfilling the outcomes that Gallup have so clearly pointed to? Engagement, for me, a lot of it does come back to feedback. And John Hattie, he's an Australian researcher, and he and his colleagues have done the data, done the work on feedback and its importance. And And so just, to segue here to some of the numbers and then build a bit of a case for this. Let me read a couple of these. And what he's done is take thousands of studies and roll them together. So his work is a meta study of data that's been collected, huge amounts of data. And I don't think, this doesn't surprise me. I taught for 10 years that 50% of student success has got nothing to do with us, whether we're the teacher, the school, the curriculum designer. It's about the student, their situation, their mindset. But 30% of student success is influenced by teachers. Now his data is, I think, mostly K-12, so take it with a grain of salt, but to me it rings true. And of the things that teachers can do, feedback is the most impactful tactic that we have as teachers. And to me, that comes down to engagement. If it's done well, feedback is about engagement and connecting. Does my teacher know my name? Let's go way beyond that. Let's get into a dialogue between teacher and student that deepens the relationship. And so that's how I take that number. Now, oddly enough, Hattie doesn't really define feedback. And Grant Wiggins, who's another giant of, again, primarily K-12 education research and thinking, he's the understanding by design guy. He took this a step further. He acknowledged that Hattie really didn't define what feedback was, but went on to define it. And points out what it isn't, that it's not advice or good job or anything like that. It's certainly not. In the world of, again, broader higher education, feedback can often mean some adaptive machine learning quiz that tells you how you've done. That's what feedback often means when educators and companies talk about feedback. That's not what I think about. I agree with Grant, and this has had a big impact on me, that feedback is goal-referenced, tangible, transparent, actionable, user-friendly, specific, personalized, timely, ongoing, and consistent. I think everything in that sentence we would get and agree with. The part that surprised me and got me thinking was the first part, goal-referenced. And so what I've taken from this is that feedback isn't feedback unless it concerns a shared goal. And thinking of my own teaching, a lot of this is going to be personal. I'm just going to pick on myself, right? Not project onto you. But thinking back, I don't think my students really shared my goals necessarily. So when they got feedback on something, if you believe Grant Wiggins, if it's not something I care about and I'm thinking about and I'm striving for, I'm not even going to take it as feedback. I'm not going to consider it. I'm not going to digest it and act upon it. And so that for me is a pretty big jumping off point. Learning outcomes aren't necessarily something that students care about. They might care about a grade, getting through the class, getting on to the next class, all of their personal issues and things that are going on, right? So this idea of goals, to me, really resonates, because if you had the power to adjust curriculum and really think about this, and you believe all of this, or could experiment with it, you'd do some things to figure out if that's really true. You'd really understand what are students' goals and then align things backwards. And Grant Wiggins is the understanding by design guy, the backwards design guy. So in a way, what are your goals? And I'm going to design everything backwards from there, because it will be meaningful to you once we start with that point. Feedback, as I said, is, and hindsight's 2020, a bit of an obsession. And the first memory I have, really, of feedback was my first job out of college, which was at this fantastic factory, GE factory in Western Pennsylvania, that makes those diesel engines for locomotives. I was a manufacturing engineer. It's my first job out of college. And a fascinating place to be. I mean, you could stick, I'm not really a machine head car person, but you could stick your head inside of that engine block. I mean, it's astounding how big the scale of these engines. And the way GE worked, very, very, and really GE, and part of what I wanted to do today was connect to the history of Waypoint, which is still something that's very meaningful to you guys. Because my experiences there really informed the creation of Waypoint. GE, very, very measurement-focused culture. As a new engineering management trainee, you were evaluated twice over your first year, 6 months and 12 months. And your evaluation was a rubric. They didn't call it that. I didn't even know what a rubric was until I built software that was essentially a rubric. But it was a rubric, and on a 5-point scale. And this is how meaningful that rubric was. You added together the two, this is a long time ago, so look how well I remember this. You add the two numbers together, a 5 and a 5, a 5 and a 4, that was your raise after 1 year. 10%, 9%, 8%. So it mattered. Talk about aligning goals, right? So that feedback session after the first 6 months was really meaningful. And it also, even more so, because I wasn't that mercenary, at least at that point, even more so, it said to you, if you got a 5 or a 4, we were all there to be the kings and queens of GE in 10 or 15 years, right? To be the CEOs and the VPs, and that was what these training programs were all about. So you wanted to be the top of the heap. You know, anything less than a 3 and you were kind of out the door. In fact, they told you that, I think. GE had this culture, which I think is gone, of getting rid of the bottom 20% or something like that. So it was a very, very tangible, concrete process that they had. I got a 4. I don't remember any of the feedback. It was a sit down with my manager. I don't really remember what he said, but I got a 4. And I asked him the question. And you know, sometimes you don't remember or you don't think quickly enough to ask these questions. I'm really glad I asked. I said, well, what would it have taken to get a 5? And his answer, I don't do 5s. Like, okay, well, that tells me a lot about this organization, right? That there's this abstract goal that you just can't even reach if no matter what you do. So that to me stands out because that's a broken feedback process, right? You know, the rewards are not even aligned with what, so yeah, I'm seeing heads nod, so you get it. So that was really a first point for me. So a question to tie this back into teaching, how do we build shared goals with our students and use the most effective tactic that we've got, especially in an asynchronous world, right? Where you can't use the power of your personality to influence students as easily as you can in a face-to-face class and all the other tools that are kind of subjective. And async online, feedback is largely where it's at. So how can we better use that? So I've had the strange honor of taking undergraduate community college classes for the last 2 years in Texas, which is where I live now. And I'm not going to share why. It's kind of a short but curious story as to why I would be sitting in a classroom taking a history course at a community college. I'll share that gladly after the camera stopped rolling. It's nothing criminal. But I have, and it's been a fantastic product design experience to be sitting in a room with mostly traditional 18-year-old, just got out of high school, now I'm in community college trying to get some sort of associate's degree to get on with my life. And being there is this kind of gray hair who's got a master's degree, who taught for 10 years. You know, it's really a fascinating thing. So one of the classes I took was history. And so I'll use this as a bit of a structured thing. If we were thinking about curriculum and teaching history after the Civil War, say we had some big choices. How do we go about doing this? And I'm going to tie this to goals. Would we, in our class for 14 weeks, recite fact after fact, and every couple of facts remind students that this will be on the test? Right? What would that goal be? Well, actually, it might align with students wanting to pass the class and do well. That's been one of my experiences. One of the many benefits to taking these classes is realizing how atrocious a lot of higher ed is. So literally a professor with a room full of students, half of whom have their heads on the desk, being told every other minute, this will be on the test. And it's coming from a good place. This particular professor really cared about student success, wanted his students to succeed. But remember this, write this down. It'll be on the test. To me anyway, really crazy. So that would be one choice for teaching this class. Another choice, we could show a nice, History Channel documentary on whatever subject. And a little benefit there would be we get some downtime while our students watch. We all remember high school where that would be a thing. That's another option. We could, even more kind of lackadaisical, we could show another classic film from 1999 this time, Wild Wild West, which is about the time after the Civil War and the railroads. We could show that to our students, and a goal would be just to entertain them and kill some time maybe. Or we could ask a big question. Grant Wiggins would call it an essential question that relates to our lives and try to engage students into thinking like historians. One of these classes that I took had a Pearson textbook, and the Pearson textbook in the introduction spelled out the learning outcomes that they had. And one of them was to think like an historian. Apparently historians take a lot of multiple choice tests, is my takeaway, right, as a critic. And so yeah, we could go this route of trying to think of something big to engage our students, to get them to think, debate, connect to current events. And for those of you who are online, everybody in the room is voting for C. Yes, we would show the classic Will Smith and that other guy film with like the arachnoid crawling thing and the railroads, and that would be an awesome way to spend our time. Okay, so actually this came from sitting in a class with this exact subject matter, and the teacher showing a map. And for me, making this connection that I'd never seen or thought of before, the Transcontinental Railroad ended in San Francisco. I wouldn't have known that. So I learned something from my community college class, right? I shouldn't bash it too much. I actually learned something. I wouldn't have known that if you'd asked me that 3 months ago. Where did the railroad end? I don't know, I guess, maybe I would have guessed San Francisco, I don't know. But the moment that I saw the map and that the railroad ended in San Francisco, because I'm a geek and a software guy, I immediately, I mean, literally what popped into my head was, I bet Stanford was a railroad guy. And I probably knew that from somewhere, because where did Google come from? It came out of Stanford. Where do a lot of startups come from? The whole Silicon Valley ecosystem is largely a Stanford creation, right? Facebook was Harvard, but the second that they wanted to grow, they moved out there to get money, and there's this whole ecosystem. Leland Stanford was a railroad executive who became governor, I think, became governor of California. And I maybe, again, knew that, but that map, so to me, how do you make the whole railroad thing and the importance of the Interstate Commerce Act and all that relevant to today's students? That would be one way to ask, where did the internet come from? Because if Stanford hadn't had all that money, meaning the university, right, and where it was, et cetera, it maybe would have happened somewhere else. And that might be a lousy strategy, by the way, you know, especially with 30 or 50 students who may be like, who cares where the internet came from? You know, it's just always been there for me. It's fascinating for me because it's something that didn't always exist. Maybe it wouldn't be for a more traditional student. So part of the answer for this kind of big macro picture of storytelling and aligning goals for me is, boy, in a perfect world, you'd have 5 or 6 of those big questions that could drive the entire curriculum and the student could choose. And that's what would lead them into, and as a byproduct of that, they would get some dates and some facts and learn about things. But that would be arguably a much more value-added way to learn. Now, speaking to this audience, I realize that's a big curriculum kind of question that when I taught, I didn't have that power to say, okay, we're going to completely switch the whole thing around. We had a team that designed it, you know, in a way similar to faculty at Ashford. So I kind of started with that just to paint the picture and tell a couple of funny stories and show a picture of Will Smith. But that's one goal, right? Intellectual curiosity, to try to fire up the interest of our students to answer questions. And then everything kind of flows from that. It's arguably, for me, because I'm an engineer by undergraduate training, it's easier to do in STEM because it's project-based learning, right? It's not how most education works. Most of it is learn all these math problems for 5 years before you ever do anything fun with them. That's how I've got kids now in college and high school. It's still that way for the most part. But if you wanted to realign things and have people learn all the facts as a byproduct of something larger, project-based learning is the way to go. To make this more actionable for us, this was really my point of reflection as I was preparing for this, that a goal that I think, and a lot of what I'm talking about today is hypothesis, right? So in the chat and questions and afterwards, please challenge, ask questions. I'd love to continue that dialogue. But for me, I think students want to have a relationship with us as teachers. They may not even want to admit it, because it's kind of geeky in a way, like, what, I want my professor to be my friend, you know, if you think of the traditional 18-year-old student. And maybe part of it is just wishful thinking, right, on my part as well. But I think this is an almost underutilized power that we have to go back to aligning goals, right? Why should I care about this feedback? Because I want to have a relationship with you as a teacher, as a mentor. And so this is a second way of thinking about how could we construct goals that we would share that would then drive more meaning into the feedback we provide. So I guess this is a rhetorical question, but I really have no idea. Do Ashford students, do you think, many of you have taught at other institutions, we've all been traditional students ourselves, we've got kids, grandkids, what have you. Do you think Ashford students more or less, or just the kind of average, want a relationship with you? Or is it a more transactional kind of experience? I said earlier today, actually, I taught engineering students who maybe you're more of a hard case, cynical, you know, type. I felt quite often that if they could just push $100,000 across the table and I could push a diploma back at them, they'd have been quite happy, right? So some of my darker days as a teacher, I thought of it as a sort of sadly tactical or a transactional sort of relationship. I'm being more hopeful today. Grad school, I think, would be even more so if you follow this line of reasoning, right? In grad school, one of the reasons you go to graduate school is to have an actual relationship with a professor that you never got because they never knew your name as an undergrad, but you get a chance to sit in smaller classes and create knowledge, right, rather than just learn it, which is part of what grad school is all about. So I think the answers to these questions are yes, they do, but I'd love to, you know, maybe in Q&A or as things proceed, get some clarification on that. So assuming that it does matter, how can we use storytelling to leverage the relationship, the desire for a relationship, and to make feedback more meaningful? I have a few stories to tell. This is the fun part for me, okay? Because this is really the origin of this whole thing. What a good looking dude. I mean, really, right? Omar Sharif, holy mackerel. the genetics just all came together. I don't know if you know, I think that's him in Lawrence of Arabia. Yeah, I think it is. So my wife tells the story, and she told it to me a long, long time ago, and it's always fascinated me. She had a middle school teacher, Mrs. Van Riper, who was this old lady, and she was probably like 45, right? When my wife, yeah, the older folks are laughing a bit. When my wife was in middle school, you know, ancient, right? So Mrs. Van Riper, can you imagine being a middle school teacher with a bunch of 7th graders with their hormones raging, and your name is Mrs. Van Riper? I mean, it's just, you can't make it up. So Mrs. Van Riper came into school one day, class one day, and said, if you, and I don't remember exactly how she set it up and how she used it, but she said basically, if you're good and you do this, that, and the other, I'm going to tell you about my new boyfriend, Amazar Was-Werbin. And I'm going to tell you about Amazar next Wednesday. So she used it to get like a week of work out of them, right? And make them do stuff. And and it stuck with my wife, this is many years ago. She get, oh my God, this old lady who's like basically like a desiccated corpse mummy has a boyfriend, and his name is Amazar Was-Werbin. And you know, and when I think of Amazar Was-Werbin, I think he would look like that, right? So does anybody, particularly the grammarians in the room, who is Amazar Was-Werbin? It's the conjugation of the verb to be. So it's a bit of a party trick where she pulled the tablecloth out from underneath everything, but my wife didn't take it that way. It was just such a fascinating thing to spend a week thinking about this boyfriend, Amazar Was-Werbin. It's a cheap, you know, and part of what I actually will tee up here is this just cheap party tricks to try to hook students, right? Because what is storytelling? What is story? We're in California, right? California, Hollywood, storytelling out here is, can we do Iron Man 27? Because it'll make $700 million and we'll have 3 fights. You know, there's a formula, right? Just plug it in and away we go. Storytelling is a formula. And when it's done well, it's so elemental to us as humans, I would argue. It has immense power. And that's part of, you know, what I'm trying to get at today. So to teach, to me, and this is sitting in these classes, back to my experience in community college, I came kind of hard down on this, that, and the more accurate way for me to phrase this in my head is, if it isn't a story, you're not teaching, but that's a double negative, and I really don't like that. So flip it around. To teach is to be a storyteller. You know, by implication, if you're not telling stories, you're not really teaching. You're drilling, you know, you're whatever. So I'm arguing here that there is power that we can leverage to achieve our goals for our students, which they will appreciate down the road, right, to actually learn the content that we want. A couple of other tributes, and maybe I'll be beating a dead horse here, but Dr. Lawley was a guy that I had as a student at Drexel. He taught materials engineering. And I can't honestly remember anything I learned in those courses, but he was a ham. And every week, so my point here is how, again, the bar is so low. They don't even know your goddamn name at most schools. So if we just come up like 5 inches to a student, it's like, oh my God, the window, you know, the roof opened up, the light shone in. So every week he would have a word on the board. I think on the board when he walked in, I don't remember. Some crazy weird SAT word, because he was an English guy, like literally from England with an accent, and he wanted us to be a little more literate as engineers. So he would try to teach us, the only word I remember is libro-cubicularized. And my friends and I, we thought this was hysterical. Like, we used that word for the next, and maybe, you know, I'm full cards on the table. I might be a total geek. I am a word guy. This might not work with other people, but my friends thought it was pretty funny too. Libro-cubicularized is reading in bed. It's like a fancy way to see. So we would be like, oh, I'm going to go libro-cubicularized, you know. So that's my little icon. Now, that had nothing to do with teaching materials engineering, but it kept us, because I think he put it on the board, and he wouldn't tell you what it was until the end of the class. Wouldn't work today because you could Google it, but back then you couldn't. The larger one, which again stuck with me, and you know, again, the power of storytelling, I don't have to struggle to remember this. He also did something like Mrs. Van Riper, where he said, if you guys, the average on the midterm is above a whatever, I will tell you the story of the spherical chicken. We're all like, whoa, geez, what's that? You know, and anything to not talk about materials engineering for 5 minutes as well, right? You got to remember the student mentality. And he did. He delivered the story of the spherical chicken, which I don't have time to do in great detail. It was actually, as I discovered, it was in Big Bang Theory. They used it. It must be like an old vaudeville kind of joke. the punchline, and you can look it up and hear the whole joke if you're curious, is physicists, in order to figure out how big a chicken coop to build for some farmer that hired them, the first step is to assume a spherical chicken. And that's a joke to physicists. If you're a physicist or an engineer, you're laughing when you hear that because, yes, the model completely destroys the reality of the situation, but we've got to start with something, right? So that's the spherical chicken. And he told us that story, more drawn out and funny, and we all thought it was quite entertaining and built a relationship, right? Did I want to work harder for this guy because I felt like he cared, even though he didn't know my name, actually? If he'd run over me with his car, he would not have known who I was, but it built a relationship. Final story, which I only thought of this morning, but this is a nice one because it ties to feedback directly. I had an English teacher in high school named Mr. Cabot. And Mr. Cabot wrote on a paper that I wrote, and actually is one of the first times that I wrote something in school that actually meant something to me. And it was a personal narrative kind of a thing. I remember what I wrote about. I don't remember what we were asked to write about. And he wrote in the margins, and this was not Waypoint. This was handwritten in the margins. With no explanation, I think he put quote marks around it. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And I don't think, maybe he put Janis Joplin, I don't remember exactly, but I certainly got it. Either I asked him or what have you. It's from her song. Chris Christopherson, I think, actually wrote it on the song. And it really stuck with me. And you know what that now as an educator, as I think of that, it meant to me, it wasn't the commas should be here or your thesis statement's in the wrong place. He was engaging with my writing as a reader and treating me as kind of an equal, or at least seriously, right? He was treating me seriously to respond. It made him think of something. So in a way, we created some knowledge together, or created some spark of creativity, and which is what writing is supposed to do, right? It wasn't the teacher, oh God, I got 94 more of these to read, and Huckleberry Finn this, and oh gee, it was him engaging with it as a somewhat unique piece of writing. And that meant something to me at the time. And I was kind of an underachiever, not a very good student, but it stuck out to me that he had put that tiny little comment, and here I am 30 some years later talking about it and remembering it. So to me, these things have power, and part of it is because it can create a relationship. Just to make this, we all love stories, right? This is the golden age of storytelling. The amount of money that Netflix and Apple and HBO are spending on, it must be the best time to be a story runner and a screenwriter that's ever been. Because you can just go bid it, I imagine just bid to, or get bid over by all these different networks that are raising billions of dollars to create more and more series. So we're living in the greatest age of storytelling, arguably, but pulling it apart a little bit is maybe something that we haven't all done. So I just wanted to share a few things. There's the classic stories teach you everything you need to know. What was Amazar was Werbin? That was a bit of a whodunit, right? Like tune in next week and you'll find out. James Bond beginnings, right? Every James Bond movie, this is a particularly hokey one with Roger Moore in the lead role, starts with some big, huge, crazy chase, right? In order to hook you as a viewer. Up, which I just watched again a week or two ago, has this marvelous little incident that is surprise. Surprise is a storytelling strategy, where the house is first lifted off, right? And it's floating, and he's kind of sitting, the old man sitting in a chair or something, and there's a knock at the door. And what? He's floating. He's hundreds of feet off the ground. And there's that little kid, right, who was, I don't know, outside or something on the porch when it ripped free and floated. So just that surprise gives us pleasure and makes us to want to know more. And so, these are some of the things that you can do. You don't necessarily control the entire course design, right, to make an essential question be the overarching story, but you can do it through announcements, you can do it through feedback, you can do it through responding in discussion forums, and plant these little seeds, right, that leverage your power as an instructor. And again, I think what students want, which is to know more about you, to build a relationship with you as an instructor. I mentioned earlier that I'm aware that this could be taken fairly cynically and negatively. I've got a friend who's a professional salesperson, and I was kind of, I don't remember how it came up, but I was kind of complaining about fakeness and when people try to build a bond and it's really inauthentic. And he's like, oh yeah, it's like when you walk into somebody's office and they've got a fish on the wall and you say as the salesperson, oh, you fish too, right? Like whatever it is, it could be like a ball gown. Oh, you're a cross-dresser too, right? Whatever it takes to make the sale. the salesperson will, and he said that very knowingly. So there is a side of it. You've got to be yourself and authentic. And my point with the different stories is, there's a comic way to do it. There's a sharing, maybe oversharing your own personal life way to do it. There's the Lawley way, which was just kind of vaudeville jokes, in a sense, or totally removed from him as a person. Different ways to do this that hopefully do make it more of an authentic thing. Okay, so to change gears a little bit here and finish, because really trying to, and this is the geeky engineer lizard brain part of me, because what I've been trying to do in software for 15 years now is take a lot of those goals and desires and scale them and make them easier and make it more productive and easier for us as instructors to accomplish those things. So I thought, particularly, there's only one audience in the world now that would really want to do this or would care, to talk a little bit about the origins of Waypoint, which you guys are still using. That's a screenshot, and I apologize. I told Morgan in advance, trigger warning. There might be some people online that are having seizures looking at those blue buttons and that screen from the original Waypoint, which you guys licensed. And I asked permission. I think Liz Cruson, I knew her as Liz Tice, is online with us, faculty member. I met her when she was provost at the 2008 HLC conference. This was the software. And I gave a presentation. And she made a beeline to me, just like I did at Brandon Bastide over his Gallup poll. And my memory of it is, and I tell the story quite a number of times, she said, I've never found anything that does assessment and teaching at the same time. And that was the click. And then we sat down. This is a story I tell. Waypoint had, I don't know, 25, 30 clients at this point, nice mixture of schools, Drexel, Wharton School of Business, University of Virginia, San Jose State University, with this good mixture of clients. So I wasn't completely unused to contracts, but we sat down and she said, okay, I want a 3-year, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but I think the gist is right. I want a 3-year contract. First year, you need to write it for 15,000 students. The second year for 25,000. The third year for 40,000. I'm like, what kind of school are you with? I mean, I'd never heard anything like that. Usually it was, well, we have 1,400 students in our management program, and we'll do a year contract and see how it goes. And then they would use it with two teachers would use it. Instead of 1,400, it would be like 80 students at the end of the year, and they'd get some data and be able to show their accreditors. And so this was such an unusual thing, and it really sticks out in my memory. So the reason for bringing this up is that Waypoint, the goal of it, so this is about rubrics, right? And it still is. Now it's about document markup and rubrics with a better data model than anything else that's out there still. The fun part for me is, you guys, some of you remember that. This is the original Waypoint. This is my little private personal database. And if you just get almost the visual layout of the criteria being vertical, right? This different UX, but this is the same tool. That was the first, I called it 0.1. The point of my telling the story is, this was just one tiny feature of the original Waypoint that I built for myself. This is what Waypoint really was. It was a student relationship management platform. And no, I did not teach Bart Simpson. This is a real screenshot of the real app that I loaded on my computer last week to take a screenshot, and I just put Bart over the picture of the real student. Waypoint, the rubric piece and the assessment piece, was one button on that screen. This was me trying to build a relationship with my students. Little notes, the grandfather died on this weekend, or they didn't turn this paper in for this reason, a glance at all of their grades. It was very hard to pull all this information together. And this, in a way, has been the mission that I've been on. Now, this is dated 2003, so this is a 15-year-old screenshot, and you can see its age. This is just using Microsoft Access if you're curious. But I was trying to pull all this information together and make it easy for me to track students across multiple terms. That's what I was up to. So now, fast forward, what am I up to now is still these same challenges. How can I help teachers scale building a relationship with students? How can I improve the world of feedback, which is arguably one of the most crucial, important tactics that we have as teachers? So I have a company, 11 Trees, and there's a few reasons for the name, but if you think of 1-1, trying to get back to a one-to-one dialogue between teacher and learner, that's part of the reason for the name. And I'm working, and part of the innovation here is I'm building solutions that work with the tools you already know and love. And part of that's necessity. I can't go build some giant platform. So these are tools that work with Canvas, they work with Google Docs, they work with Microsoft Office. They kind of sit piggyback apps on top of these other tools, to bring some of the things we've just talked about in the abstract, bring them home and make them work for you while you're using the things you already know and love. So to walk through this a little bit, there's two solutions. And one is called Q, and the other is AP, is Annotate Pro. Q is about students. And to kind of tie this together, and I'll finish with this, Q, as we've been experimenting, and this is way more of the beta product out of the two things that I've got. Mindy and Chris Moore and Adam Selhorst have been sponsoring, thinking through this and trying it out with students, and we're moving into a kind of broader pilot starting in 2019. So it's a bit of advertising, right, that this is going to be out there, trying to give students tools to help them get their work done and do things like make life more efficient for them. And I'll show you a few screenshots in a moment. Deliberate practice is a big piece of this for me. We often just assign something to students and they do it once and that's it, as opposed to practicing and trying it. To leverage all of the fantastic resources that every university has. Every university has some kind of tutoring, a writing center, librarians who are desperate to talk to students, right? In the sense that they want to help them. And for a student at a traditional university, that means 19 different websites, each one with a different look and feel. Most likely. And so lots of just challenges around the friction to get there. And the part that I'm going to talk about today is encouraging a growth mindset, which is one of my newer obsessions, and to bring the data that we're collecting to students and make it actually useful as opposed to sitting in a database somewhere. So just broad kind of goals, that's the student side. On the teacher side, this is a solution that Morgan has sponsored piloting, particularly with Civitas, which we're working on and will be coming to you. Is the more mature, and those of you who know and use Waypoint will see some of the same kind of ideas and threads in it. And again, I'll show you a couple of screenshots. To make feedback faster and more efficient and more impactful, to personalize it, to make it more articulate, targeted, supportive, accountable. The accountability piece is kind of newer in terms of my thinking versus Waypoint. I mean, I think actually, yeah, my next slide, right? Feedback is broken in so many ways, but really it's just like lemmings running off a cliff. In that we just hurl it at students, and what really becomes of it? Does it really get used for anything? Do we follow up on it? And that's largely because it's not easy to follow up on, right? If you're only teaching one student, you could give them feedback and then have a dialogue about it, but no one really anymore is in that situation. So I'm trying to address the challenges with feedback, that it's unenforceable, it's passive, it's impersonal. And so, so these are some of the areas that I've focused to give you some of the takeaways from this and also a view into what the thing's doing. This is Canvas SpeedGrader, and it's a document inside of SpeedGrader, so I know that you're using SpeedGrader primarily for discussions, and I'll show you that in a second too. So the thing down the right-hand side is my solution. So this is to me, a good visual example of making something that isn't some other thing you go to, but something that works, almost wraps around Canvas to support you as a teacher. And all Annotate Pro, the name is I'm trying to be very nuts and boltsy with these solutions, just make them be clear productivity wins and not too complicated. It's just about all those things we say to students over and over again, captured in a very easy to use user experience, so you can put those comments into SpeedGrader or Gmail, or Google Docs, or a Canvas discussion with a couple of clicks. So it's that piece of Waypoint in a way that is the comment libraries, but made universal. If you're someone, I don't think anybody at Ashford really is in Microsoft Word, but a lot of educators still are. I know traditional universities really well. Part of my value proposition here is these libraries can be shared across Word, Google Docs, Canvas, almost anything you could dream up that's a web-based app, you can use these libraries. So if you've got instructors that want to use what they want to use, well, it can support that as well. So, so that entire chunk of text that's in the comment bubble, that was added from one of those blue favorite buttons on the right. Rubrics inside of Canvas, same thing. You want to add some text, you can click search, find, boom, and there it is. This is just showing full text search, right? So I want to add a comment, I'm thinking about counter argument, and I can just start typing and it finds it, and then I can add it and then personalize it. So again, just trying to be a better mousetrap when it comes to feedback, very similar to a lot of other tools that are out there. Turnitin has invested in their Feedback Studio solution, which has a similar idea, nothing too earth-shattering. The part that applies to you guys in particular in the way that this got started is the templates for Civitas, for Inspire for faculty. having, right now, I think, a pretty complicated path for faculty to get to the templates that have been written, to use them. So now that becomes, once we get this out into the world, becomes a wrapper around Civitas where you can just find the right template, create your own, share them with your colleagues informally, right? Because this is a cloud solution that is doing some of the things people want to share, right? You want to be able to take a library, give it to 150 faculty, and easily aggregate all the results. That comes naturally to me. So that's what Annotate Pro is up to. The part that ties into the conversation today, which I wanted to set the stage a little bit and also just share what I've been working on and that these things are coming, at least in a piloty sort of a sense. The part that I want to connect to our conversation about storytelling and relationship is, to me, finally 15 years later, that little picture with Bart Simpson, getting to the point where I have a shot at creating that mechanical lever to help faculty more efficiently create a relationship with students. And so what you're seeing here on the right is that same toolbar, but it's got the little, and it's a weird picture actually, that little avatar. That's the avatar of the Canvas user. It's a character from Nightmare Before Christmas, actually, which is at least topical, right, or the right time of year to be using a picture from Nightmare Before Christmas. If I click on the avatar, it pops up a history of feedback to that student. Not just this term, necessarily, not just this assignment, back to the beginning of time. For a school like Ashford, potentially from every instructor that's ever assessed that student. And if you look at the screenshot, you can see the pie charts, which are clickable. And on the left, the pie chart is a kind of competency, right? A group of feedback, about argument, about style. On the right, the pie chart is the actual specific comments. Have I said, part of what drove me as a teacher, have I said this to Charlie 18 times already? If so, I would like to know that so I can hold Charlie's toes to the fire, in a friendly kind of way. Below, though, the pie charts is the full text of everything you ever wrote to that student in SpeedGrader, including, and this is where it starts to become kind of cool, completely custom freeform comments where you didn't even use the libraries, you just wrote something. It's all captured and searchable in reverse chronological order. The dates even will link you back to that assignment in Canvas. So if you wanted to see it, you can click, opens up a new window, and you're looking at SpeedGrader with that assignment in your comments. The reason this ties in is this is what exists now, that you guys have a pilot to use, is what if this view was that more personalized, and to pick up on Dr. Swenson yesterday, humanizing view of this student. To put the picture there is literally like an afternoon of work, if that. That's next on my list, the avatar. Because I always wanted to be able to see the student, right? And just humanize them. And not, it's very easy to give somebody a 78 if you're just like, oh, just another paper, another student. But if you're looking at a picture of them and you can connect that to their personal stories, what if it had on here, because you're not teaching face-to-face, what if it had some of the personal statement the student had shared in some of the courses where they have to write something about themselves, or they filled out a little profile. What's your favorite thing to do? Do you have a dog? Whatever those things are could be there. So when you're in a discussion forum, automatically AP pulls up this history and this kind of view of that student, and you can use that to inform your dialogue with them in a discussion forum, or in an email that you're sending, or a Civitas message that you might send. What if it was tied into advising? And this gets into some, gray areas of what would even be useful or right to do, but what if some of the personal situation was there? If you could add to it as an instructor, you've got such a view into their life, you could add to it that would make those comments global, not as academic feedback to the student, but as notes about what's going on in their life. What if we connected to LinkedIn? Or made it optional for a student to connect to LinkedIn so that their personal or their professional history was there in some way, shape, or form, so that I could use that to respond to them in discussions and make comments that were relevant to their interests and their career. So to me, a huge opportunity around the student relationship management and leveraging data that's coming out of potentially even Waypoint, right? Pull that data in so that I've got rubric data going back to the beginning of time potentially for the student that can inform my criticism and feedback going forward. So this to me is the, and again, I get that this could be kind of creepy or overly geeky, right? But what I'm trying to do is give faculty tools to scale and make more efficient that personalization. It's an oxymoron in a way, right? but my hope is that it isn't, and that these tools could really help us be much more efficient in building connections to students and telling stories to them that are meaningful. I'm up on the 10-minute mark. There was a little bit more. Have we got outrage, revolt online? Do you want me to pause for a moment? Any questions? Maybe I'll just finish off with another angle here, depending on where we're at.
They're saying the system looks nice, a lot of cliffhangers, you're doing good.
All right, keep going. Okay. Because in a way, to me, the biggest lever from my thinking, and again, this was so useful to me to try to bring this into some sort of articulate, I may be succeeding or not, trying to sum up where I've been going and thinking about in terms of product development, because we can be, the number John Hattie had was 30% of student success is the instructor, and some portion of that is feedback. That's good news in a way, but it doesn't guarantee student success, right? It's just what we can do as instructors. What is much more powerful is the psychology of students themselves. And there was an article which I would encourage everybody to go and find. You just Google who gets to graduate. Maybe you read it back in 2014 in the New York Times, written by Paul Tough, who wrote the book on grit and persistence. That to me was a revelation. I read it actually right after I left Bridgepoint to join Macmillan Learning and run an adaptive quizzing platform. And I read this article and I thought, this is the secret to improving student outcomes. And why is this not a product? This is back, so in a way, no one else has done it yet, so I'm still lurching towards trying to productize some of the ideas, because it's about the psychology of student success and the work that's, some of the research from Stanford and other, ironically Stanford, and other places, and the work that was done at UT in Austin, oddly enough, where I now live, to try to impact student success and behavior. And a lot of it comes down to growth mindset. And I would love this to be the beginning of a dialogue, because I don't know your students. You as faculty know them, you see this, you can validate whether this is true or not. But one of the things that researchers have spent time on is this idea of the entity theory of intelligence, that I do really badly on one test, and that tells me that I suck, and I'm not meant for college, and I should leave. Versus, I'll shake that off, I'll get some help, I'll go to tutoring, I'm better than this, I can do better, and you move forward. And the crazy, this is a long quote, but I wanted to read a little part of it. Seemingly crazy, and this is part of the experimentation that I hope Mindy and I and the deans can get to, because this feels too good to be true, that community college students, not some of the studies were done at Ivy Leagues, and these are community college students in remedial courses who were given this small activity. And I'll just give you a moment to read it actually, rather than me reading it, and then I'll wrap everything up. So again, because I'm a geeky computer guy and I see software products, I'd already been building this platform for students to help curate the resources that they need to use, those 19 different websites, bring them together into one user experience. And streamline and simplify that. With the simple, again, I'm trying out of the gate here to build things that are just simple and straightforward, at least at first cut. That if it's easier and faster to get to something, I'm more likely to use it. And that's it, that's my value prop. If it's one click to get to tutoring, I'm more likely to use tutoring than if I have to go find it. And you guys are way better than most schools in terms of their consistency of layout of the courses and where things are. You're using Canvas, which is the cleanest, most straightforward LMS. But still, bringing these things together into one place, and that's what we've been working on. The part that ties into this work, the Paul Tough article, this is a view of Q inside of Word. So if you notice, this is Ashford CRJ 201 in the top left. Same kind of thing, it's a panel down the right-hand side. It's like this helper with a bunch of resources. You can see the course information. That blue button is a way you could message an instructor from right inside of Word, and the message comes into Canvas. So I'm working on a paper. Yeah, okay, I could go email you or go to Canvas. How many clicks is that? But it's about breaking down, for me anyway, breaking down the friction involved in reaching out and getting help. There's a big green, you can see it, a big green tutoring button, trying to bring that front and center for students. The part that I wanted to finish with is the very top of the stack. Can you read, I work third shift? So that's meant to be a tease. And again, back to experimenting. we have data, we know when students click on these things, right? So, and we can experiment with different ways to kind of highlight it and bring it forward. That's meant to be a tease. Whether anybody pays attention to it or not, is going to be an interesting question to answer. It's a tease in the sense that what I hope is people click the I and get the next view, which is the full quote. Because that long quote that you read is about the power of reading stories and ideally contributing your own stories around overcoming challenges. And what we've done, just to kind of kludge this together for now, is we got quotes from the tutoring review sessions, is where we got some material. The bulk of the content in that little area, I call it the motivation station, are quotes from famous people talking about success. Like Michael Jordan, I've missed 30,000 shots in my life, these great quotes that I tried to find and put in there. Only some of it is Ashford specific, but it's just trying to be enough of an example that to kind of spike our thinking and future work. The one video I was able to kind of tie, it's not perfect in terms of a story of overcoming and this growth mindset, but how powerful to be in Microsoft Word. Q knows that you've got an exam coming up. It's tied into Canvas. So it could pop this up for you automatically. And it could be a story from an alumni or an upperclassman who's made it through that class who kind of matches your demographics, who told a story. And maybe there's a button where you could share your own, down the line. So an experiment platform, or a platform to experiment the behavior side, the psychology side of success, which, again, is that too good to believe, the data out of that community college? Perhaps. I know you guys have experimented with different tools that try to attack. It's the hardest thing, right? Behavior, so ingrained in people and how they think, and how do you overcome that? But to me, it's such a rich area to experiment and think. So this vehicle, which is, again, just trying to be this very straightforward helper, right, for students to bring everything together in one place, make it faster, make it easier. It's a Chrome extension as well, a browser extension. So this is a different kind of set of resources. But if you see the Q in the very top, that's popped open. So by January, this will be updated to work with Canvas. So one click in Google Chrome, any web page I'm on, I'll see all my Canvas stuff. And I can flip through it. I can get to tutoring right from there. But again, this kind of Trojan horse, if you will, of trying to get at behavior and psychology through this platform, and ultimately have stories from potentially thousands of students that are all coded to different courses, different majors, different demographics. I live on a farm. I'm from the Northeast. I'm deployed, right? Pitch me a story that matches my own experience that helps me get through and build a connection. So that's what, to kind of try to tie the storytelling piece together. That's what I'm up to with the other product that's student facing. So I kind of raced a little bit at the end, but I wasn't sure how long it would take to get through all of that. I know it was a lot. I know we're up on the hour, so if you've got to go to another session or a meeting or what have you, please don't hesitate. But thank you so much, and I'd love to take some questions and start a dialogue that would hopefully continue. Yeah. We're just waiting for the mic to come.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was in a session earlier with Dr. Ryan Korstange from University of Mississippi. I probably got the institution wrong, but he talked about developing identity and how the social construct inside of a classroom actually helps develop a student. And so I asked him, I said, you're talking about that development of identity and the role that faculty play and that other students play. How is that shaped? Because he was in brick and mortar. And I said, how does that relate to heavy text, videos? How do you see that playing out? And I see the correlation between the storytelling and that shaping of identity, because you have that interaction. You talked about bringing that avatar forward. What I'm curious to hear is, and maybe you could speak to, what do you see the delivery method being for these stories?
Well, my mind goes in a bunch of directions at once, because the identity piece that he was talking about, to me, what came to my mind as you were talking was, I became, in undergraduate college, I became the kid that went to the library every night. I wasn't that kid to start out. I was the kid that used my fake ID to go buy liquor, beer and booze and bring it back and party in the dorms for a while. And I kind of skated by okay for a while until I hit a brick wall and had to either get busy studying or give up. And so that identity changed for me, right? So is that the identity I had was the person in the conference room in the library until 1 a.m. every night. That became it hadn't been my identity, but it became it. Is that, do you think, the gist of what?
Yeah, well, and he was talking about how they're shaped by the students in the classroom. I mean, you're talking about bringing in people who have been through that, have been in Afghanistan, they're going through these issues. And then you're also talking about, so you're, to rephrase for everyone online, you're talking about how, what he was talking about was how identity is shaped in the classroom. Usually the faculty and the other students help shape that identity. And in the shaping of that identity, the student is able to engage more and take on more. And you brought forward the idea of being a storyteller. And so I'm just curious about how you would see the delivery of those stories into the classroom to students with that intention of helping to develop a student from, the partier to the library goer, to the person who wants to do research, to the person who knows how to interact academically.
Yeah, or actually to tie to something that I heard this week, the student who will use tutoring, right? I'm not going to use tutoring. I don't need any help. And then somehow I get my identity changes where that becomes okay. I know you busted open, part of the reason I wanted to do this was I'm a product guy at heart. So it's like product research and crowdsourcing ideas around, because that to me is a concept that has never occurred to me before. Even in a brick and mortar face-to-face class, how do you shape identity in a class? I mean, and then how do you do it online? I have no idea, but thank you for the note, because I will go and obsess and think over that, because I see a huge opportunity to reinvent yourself when you get into a class and be a better, one of the advantages to 5 weeks, really, if you think about it, is you get a fresh start every 5 weeks. It's not twice a year, like, August and January, where I had a bad term, now I get to try again. It's fast. But how you go about shaping that, the vehicle, I think it's a wonderful question that I'd love to go ponder, and also hear, thoughts on how you might go about doing that. But I feel it is malleable, and if we could shape that as educators, almost spend as much time shaping that as we do, you didn't turn this in, or however we might be interacting, it might be way more impactful. So I don't have an answer to that, but it's an awesome question. It's really foundational.
I was just reflecting on his question and thinking about AP and what you had said about, whether we like it or not, the power of the teacher and how good or bad the teacher influences that identity, and how as a faculty member you have the opportunity to convince that learner that he or she can succeed and that they're worth your time and effort through the feedback, through the words that you choose, through the amount of time you dedicate to that student. So I think all of that ties nicely across both of the tools and can redefine in many ways the identity of the instructor as well. So you're not just the grader or the one that's going to catch them for plagiarizing. You're the one that helps establish that identity for that student.
And one of the points that I wanted to make, the origin of all of this was partly me realizing that at Saturday night at 10:30, grading my 87th paper, I'm not the same guy that graded the first one, and realizing that I'm probably not as nice. Or Sunday night at, exhausted, just trying to get through to return them on Monday. How do I guard against those worst impulses and exhaustion through standardized language, through rubrics that at least guide me? Part of the thing I wanted to say earlier when I was talking about AP is a little bit of the motivation to do it was to answer once and for all, which I now have an answer, or kind of prove what I already knew, which is not the best scientific approach, right? But what do we even give feedback to students on? I have 230,000 data points inside of AP now with this hugely diverse, not tons of users, but really diverse universities, high schools. Number one, commas. Now, a little bit of that is, okay, it's about margin comments and documents is where it started. So, okay, grammar would make some sense. And the silver lining is fully 50% of all the comments in my database are completely custom, meaning they were just typed freeform. So they're probably not about commas. But boy, if you could get that at a school level or a school district or university level and use it for PD to say, you know what, we really don't want to beat the shit out of students over commas term after term after term. You know they've got an issue, go fix it for one, put that on the student, and then let's have a dialogue that treats them as a scholar, right, to maybe tie your points together. If I react to you like Mr. Cabot did as a kind of a peer when he wrote, freedom's just another word, that affected me and my identity in the class, I guess, as a way to tie it together. So, so part of me is on this crusade to sort of help schools prove where all this effort and energy is going and to figure out if it's useful or not.
I had a question regarding the social media piece, the LinkedIn, and how you mentioned how the identity of the student can be wrapped into their social media platform. How do you see that in terms of, I don't know, the privacy pieces that might make the student a little upset if, let's say, an instructor goes, oh, by the way, I saw on your social media platform that you mentioned this, this, and this, and you start using that as part of the feedback in their paper. Do you see that being like intrusive, or do you see having some kind of guidelines behind how that's actually going to work?
Well, one of the beautiful things about working with Ashford has always been that you can have these conversations without people going completely, off the wall, which would happen at a lot of traditional universities. Like the idea of, I can see feedback a student received a year and a half ago. Like, oh, I'm going to be biased. Well, you have a certain trust in a faculty member, right? I mean, to be a professional faculty member, no, I'm not going to necessarily beat you up because somebody said yada, yada, yada to you about thesis statements a year and a half ago and you've made the same mistake again. So I err or come down on the side of oversharing when it comes to that history, but it's certainly a controversial topic at a lot of schools would be, how do we decide whether to share that? Is it anonymous? But to come back to the even more serious potential for bad things, right? If you start tying in social media, I don't know. I think LinkedIn is a good middle ground because especially, and every university is in this boat now where it's about helping students find a livelihood, right? That's, I'm old enough that I've seen that conversation change. Even the most Ivy covered, posh school with, professors with Nobel Prize, that whole bit, they're all talking about how do we get our students jobs. So tying in LinkedIn, which tends not to be political, not to be personal, would maybe be and it would be a student opt-in. The student would have to do that to sign into LinkedIn and say, I give permission to this thing at my school to be able to see my professional history and my updates to LinkedIn. So there's a couple of ways to manage that, but I totally agree that it's a potentially compelling idea that has some potential, weirdness or downside to it. Yeah.